Iran just launched a drone swarm directly at the nerve center of U.S. military power in the Middle East, and while the Pentagon was scrambling, 3 markets moved before the smoke even cleared. The one commodity that spiked before a single official statement was released? We'll get to that, but first, you need to understand exactly what was just hit, and why this changes everything. Naval Support Activity Bahrain isn't just another overseas base. It is home to the United States Navy's 5th Fleet, the forward headquarters of CENTCOM, and roughly 9,000 American military personnel, the single most strategically dense piece of U.S. real estate in the entire Gulf region. When defense analysts talk about the brain of American power projection in the Middle East, this is the building they point to. And tonight, Iran pointed drones at it. The swarm involved what regional defense trackers and open-source intelligence analysts believe were Shahed-136 loitering munitions alongside the newer jet-powered Shahed-238 variants, a combination specifically engineered to overwhelm layered air defense systems by mixing slow, cheap attrition drones with faster, harder-to-intercept platforms. This wasn't a random provocation. This was a doctrine test. The attack didn't come from Iran's territory directly. It came through the axis of resistance, the coordinated proxy network that runs from Houthi forces in Yemen through Iraqi Shia militias, all with IRGC fingerprints underneath. That chain of deniability is deliberate. It gives Tehran a diplomatic off-ramp while still delivering a military message. The base's defense layers, CRAM close-in systems, Patriot batteries, and THAAD, intercepted the majority of incoming drones. But here is the part that matters, and that most coverage will gloss over. Even a partial penetration of that perimeter is a strategic earthquake. Because it proves the saturation threshold is real, it proves the doctrine works, and it tells every adversary watching that the most fortified U.S. installation in the Gulf is not untouchable. That realization alone reprices risk across every market connected to this region. Crude oil didn't wait for a press conference. Within the first trading window after news broke, Brent futures began pricing in a risk premium that veteran Gulf traders recognized immediately. History gives us the reference points. Following major Gulf escalations, Brent crude has historically spiked between 4% and 8% within the first 24 to 48 hours. The Strait of Hormuz, sitting less than 200 miles northeast of where those drones were launched, carries approximately 20 to 21% of the entire world's oil supply. That is 17 million barrels per day moving through a waterway that is, at its narrowest point, just 21 miles wide. The International Energy Agency has modeled what even a 72-hour Hormuz disruption looks like, a $15 to $25 per barrel spike scenario, almost immediately. Iran threatened to close Hormuz as recently as January 2020 following the Soleimani assassination, and Brent jumped roughly 4% on that threat alone, with no actual disruption. Tonight, there was an actual attack. Saudi Aramco facilities across the eastern province are already on elevated alert. The world hasn't forgotten September 2019, when drone and missile strikes on the Abqaiq processing facility knocked out approximately 5% of global oil supply in a single night. That took weeks to fully stabilize. And that attack didn't touch a U.S. military command center. This one did. But crude was just the opening act. While oil grabbed the headlines, the natural gas market began moving in a way that most retail investors completely missed. Qatar's North Field, the single largest natural gas reservoir on the planet, sits approximately 180 miles from the zone of active conflict. LNG tankers departing Ras Laffan Industrial Port transit directly through the Gulf of Oman, the same waters now under elevated threat assessment. Here is why this matters beyond the Gulf itself. Europe rebuilt its entire post-Russia energy strategy around Qatari and American LNG. After Brussels sanctioned Russian pipeline gas following the 2022 invasion of Ukraine, European nations became structurally dependent on seaborne LNG in a way that has no quick alternative. The TTF benchmark, Europe's primary natural gas pricing index, was already trading with a geopolitical volatility premium baked in. Analysts covering the LNG freight market were warning privately that a sustained Gulf disruption could add a 12% to 20% conflict premium, on top of already elevated TTF prices. And the indirect winner in all of this? U.S. LNG export terminals, Sabine Pass in Louisiana, Freeport in Texas, suddenly become not just energy infrastructure, but geopolitical leverage. American LNG goes from being a commodity to being a strategic tool overnight. And then gold did something that made even veteran traders pause. Gold knew before the press release. That is not a conspiracy theory. That is market microstructure. Spot gold began moving in the 15-minute window before major wire services carried the first confirmed reports, a pattern that traders familiar with Gulf crisis pricing have seen before. Following the October 7, 2023 Hamas attack on Israel, gold crossed the $2,000 per ounce threshold within days and went on to hit an all-time high above $2,700 by October 2024. The Gulf War playbook shows the same pattern. $40 to $60 per ounce spikes within 48 to 72 hours of major escalation events. Silver followed gold, but with sharper intraday volatility, as it always does. Part monetary safe haven, part industrial metal, which means its price action is messier, but the direction is the same. The US dollar index, the DXY, historically climbs between 0.8% and 1.5% in the first 48 hours of major Gulf events, as capital floods into dollar-denominated safety. The Swiss franc and Japanese yen, the two secondary safe haven currencies, both saw immediate strengthening. Treasury yields dropped as bond prices surged on flight to safety buying. And the commodity that moved first, before gold, before oil, before any official statement, LNG futures. Specifically, the JKM Asian LNG benchmark. Someone knew the Gulf of Oman was about to become a very different place to operate a tanker. But here's what almost nobody covered: the shipping market. Here is the angle that mainstream financial media almost never leads with, and it is arguably the most economically consequential piece of this entire story. Two of the world's most critical maritime choke points are now simultaneously under active threat: the Bab el-Mandeb Strait at the mouth of the Red Sea, and the Strait of Hormuz at the top of the Gulf. According to Lloyd's List intelligence data from early 2024, Houthi attacks on Red Sea shipping had already suppressed Suez Canal container traffic by approximately 45% as major carriers rerouted around the Cape of Good Hope. Maersk, MSC, and Hapag-Lloyd, the three largest container shipping operators on the planet, have all been absorbing the cost of Cape rerouting, which adds 10 to 14 days of transit time and over $1 million per voyage in additional fuel and operational costs. War risk insurance premiums on Gulf routing, already elevated from months of Houthi activity, could realistically triple to quintuple overnight, following a direct attack on a U.S. Naval Command facility. The Baltic Dry Index, the real-time global freight stress indicator, is the number to watch in the next 48 hours. Any sudden spike there confirms that commercial operators are pricing in a structural disruption, not a one-night event. The indirect market beneficiaries sitting quietly in the background? Tanker operators like Frontline and Nordic American tankers, whose day rates explode when Gulf routing becomes dangerous and scarce. Now here is the historical parallel that should make every informed observer genuinely uncomfortable. In 1987, the United States launched Operation Earnest Will, a military escort mission to protect Kuwaiti oil tankers transiting the Strait of Hormuz that Iran had begun mining during the Iran-Iraq War. Tankers were hit, oil spiked, markets panicked, and then, eventually, they stabilized. That is the template most analysts will reach for tonight. Here is why it is the wrong one. In 1987, Iran's drone capability was zero, non-existent. The asymmetric threat that exists today, precision loitering munitions capable of GPS-guided strikes on fixed installations, launched from proxy forces across 3 countries simultaneously, simply did not exist. The October 2019 Abqaiq drone strike is a closer parallel. Markets overreacted on day 1 through day 3, partially recovered by day 7, and then repriced permanently once the vulnerability was understood. The pattern analysts are watching for now follows that same 3-phase structure: panic pricing, partial recovery, then structural re-rating if escalation continues. The critical variable in 2019 was whether the US would respond militarily. It did not. The critical variable tonight is the same question, with considerably higher stakes. So what are the sharpest analysts actually watching right now? 3 signals. That is what separates noise from actual escalation intelligence right now. Signal 1. Whether Iran officially claims this attack or maintains proxy deniability through Houthi or Iraqi militia channels, official claim means Tehran has calculated it can absorb direct US retaliation. Proxy deniability means they want the message delivered without the consequences, and that tells you how confident they are in their escalation ceiling. Signal 2, US carrier group positioning. The movement of the USS Abraham Lincoln, or USS Harry S. Truman, in the coming 48 hours is not routine naval activity. It is the single clearest real-world signal of American intent. Carriers don't move toward a conflict zone without a decision tree already approved at the highest levels. Signal 3, tanker AIS transponder data in the Strait of Hormuz. If commercial vessels begin switching off their tracking signals or voluntarily halting Gulf transits, that is the market's ground truth. It means people with actual cargo at risk have decided the threat is real, regardless of what any government press release says. And here is the callback from the top of this video. LNG futures moved first, before oil, before gold, before any Pentagon statement. That means someone in the LNG freight market had positioning information before the public narrative was said. That is worth sitting with. The real question tonight isn't whether Iran crossed a line by targeting a US command facility in Bahrain. They did. The question is whether the oil market, the LNG freight market, and the defense procurement pipeline already know what the next 72 hours look like, and are pricing it in while the rest of us are still watching the news. Because historically, by the time the headlines confirm the escalation, the first move is already over. Where do you think this goes from here? Drop your read on it below, because the comment section on this one is going to be more interesting than most.